Okay, thanks Yasmin for inviting me here. Yes, the title of my talk is Confessions of a Replicator. I first want to point out that in terms of how I'm thinking about this, although the focus of my talk is on replications, I'm not a methodologist who's developing new techniques for determining which studies need to be replicated or new procedures for doing better replications. I don't write about the philosophy behind replications. I'm not going to argue for the precise amount of direct versus conceptual replications that we should be doing in our work. And in fact, if you actually look at my record, I don't actually even do a lot of replications compared to some of my colleagues. However, I have done some replications, and really what I want to talk about today is the reactions that people have had to the replications that we've done. Because for me, the reactions that we've gotten for this have actually been quite surprising, and I think it's really problematic in terms of how people treat people who do replications or consider the work that they're doing. Basically, what seems to me to be a basic component of the scientific process is often viewed basically by surprise. People are surprised that people would want to spend their time on such an activity. So really the goal of my talk was simply to provide some insight into why I do spend some amount of my time trying to replicate the works of others, and perhaps to convince some of you that it might be a worthwhile activity as well. So why do I and my colleagues do replications? Judging from the reactions on Twitter, it might be because we are second-string researchers who have no original ideas, and we have nothing better to do other than to replicate other people's work. And we are out to tear people down because we are assholes, or people who are doing these things are assholes. And of course, these statements these points are based on, that you probably all know and have heard about. You know, they were made in the heat of the moment. They're in response to a specific incident that people had very strong feelings about. And they might be a bit more extreme than the typical opinion. However, even friends and colleagues of my own who have what I believe are similar worldviews to my own actually have voiced concern about these sorts of things and have suggested that people who are doing replication studies are out to get other people, or you often hear the term vigilante thrown around when you discuss people who are doing replication studies. Now, the real reason that I do replication studies is not because I'm out to get you. The real reason is that I don't believe you, okay? But this is based on a really simple point. It's actually, I feel strange that I would even need to make this point, is that it's partly because I don't really believe any study, including my own. And I do want to point out that I have been on the other side of this. People have tried to replicate my studies, including nasty economists who actually take my data and reanalyze it and say I was totally wrong in the way that I analyzed those data. That's fine. It leads us to come to a better understanding of the results, the question that we're looking at. Okay? And so, I mean, even in one example from my own case, we want to take a really simple question, like how has life satisfaction changed over the course of the lifespan? I took a great data set with over 30,000 Germans from a nationally representative sample, and we got a nice result that tells us that it's pretty flat over time and then it declines towards the end of life. And then we tried to replicate that in a British sample, also 20,000 people from a nationally representative sample, and we get a completely different pattern of results. Both excellent studies. This is not sampling error, there's something different here. Now you might attribute it to the countries here, but actually I can show in a different national representative German sample, it looks more like the British data. So there is something that simply is not the same across these studies. We have to be careful about interpreting age differences in life satisfaction when we look at any one of those studies. Now, that's the case that even looking at my own studies, I am concerned about these things and I want to replicate the work. But in addition to that, I especially don't believe you if your study has certain characteristics that many people have written about, many people have shown to be associated with the lack of replicability. So if your study has massive effect sizes with small sample sizes and p-values that just pass the 0.05 threshold, then we know that this doesn't mean that there was fraud, this doesn't mean that people intentionally changed p-hack or anything like that. These are just cues, and we know some of the reasons why these sorts of things might be signs that these studies aren't going to replicate. And so these are some things that actually might cue us that it is in need of replication. Now, when we choose studies to replicate, we do so for a number of reasons. Sometimes we replicate studies that are important to us for the research that we do. Sometimes we choose studies simply because a student is interested in them. We say to our undergraduate students, are there studies that you are interested in? Let's run a replication study so that you get some experience to do this. They choose the study. or we find studies that might have some of these characteristics and we're skeptical of. So one example that we did, the first set of studies that we did actually had some of these characteristics. And this was a study that we just recently published in Emotion looking at loneliness in bathing habits. So the original paper studied the extent to which physical warmth could be substituted for interpersonal warmth, or in other words, whether people who were high in loneliness took longer, more frequent showers than those who were less lonely. Now these studies, which had sample sizes in the range of 40 to 50 people, found significant correlations between these two variables, the first of which was a correlation of about 0.57. Now, as someone who studies individual differences, this correlation alone, separate from what those constructs were, was surprising to me, because it's very difficult to find correlations that size. Even if you had two measures of loneliness, they would often only correlate just slightly higher than that. Okay? So the correlation alone was surprising to us. So what we tried to do is to replicate these results with much larger sample sizes to see what effects we would find. The study was very easy to do, so we tried to replicate these studies. Now what I'm going to show you is actually a lot of results from many more studies. It's a figure with the effect sizes for the two original studies. Those will be in orange, our replications in blue, and then just for completeness, I'll also show you 3 additional replications that the original authors conducted in the reply to our paper. So when we look at this, the results are clear. The replications that we did with much larger sample sizes, often ranging from 200 to 500 people, were much smaller in size, mostly non-significant. And so again, our confidence in this initial result changes as we do these replication studies. Now, I did also want to point out, more importantly for this talk than the actual effect size in this study, is really the reaction to the study as we went through the process of trying to do this work. Our initial goal was not to conduct a dozen replication studies of this single effect. Our initial goal was to conduct 2 studies and to throw it onto Psych File Drawer so that people in the future who are interested in this effect would see that sometimes this effect does not replicate. However, when we initially tried to do that, the response to this was to try to find any way possible to discredit these studies, to say that there's something wrong with these replications, to focus on any small detail that deviated that could possibly explain it, rather than accept the possibility, not that the original studies were wrong, that our studies contribute useful information. I don't think that our studies invalidate the other ones, say that the finding is wrong. What they say is here we have 2 more pieces of information with larger sample sizes, so we might want to weight them more heavily, that we need to think carefully about this result. So because of this reaction, we decided to conduct a few more studies, 3 or 4 more studies, and try to publish this in a paper now instead of putting it in Psych File Drawer. The reviews came back and said, well, you had a marginally significant effect there. So maybe the effect is real because of that one marginal effect. I think that was the 3rd one over. So what we did is we conducted a few more studies and a few more studies to try to address these concerns and kept trying to say that these results didn't tell us anything about the original effect. So ultimately, we ended up with a 9-study paper that was accepted at Emotion. As soon as the online version went out, people started talking about it on social media. And there, instead of saying that our effects weren't real, the reactions changed pretty dramatically. So now we started to be accused of being vigilantes because there was so much overkill in terms of the number of studies that we actually conducted to address this research. We were accused of being vigilantes, out to get the original researchers. Someone on social media accused us of gotcha research, as if we had somehow set them up to do a study that we could easily show couldn't be replicated. Others dismissed the finding as a minor finding that no one believed anyway. It was a waste of our time to assess the replicability of this effect. Now, I think that, so basically I think that in thinking about this, I think that I really don't know what we could have done to hit that sweet spot between showing that there should be some concern about the replicability of an effect and getting to this point where it's overkill and we are perceived as vigilantes. Now, I think that there's general concern that those who don't believe in effect are intentionally trying to sabotage the results. But barring outright fraud, then the features of the studies that would reflect the sabotage that we're trying to do should be obvious. You should be able to point to the things that I did wrong in my study. It would be problematic to believe that belief in the finding was a requirement to find, belief in an effect was a requirement to find it. So in all of our studies that we do, we try to work extremely hard to do the things right, and we run into a lot of obstacles in doing that. So for instance, in one recent attempt to replicate an experimental study, we contacted the original authors to request feedback on our design. We'd already tried and failed to replicate the study, and the authors pointed out some design features that may have prevented us from getting the same result that they did. However, many of the features that they criticized were actually features of the original study that we were trying to replicate. So although the authors were extremely helpful, I will point out that they participated quite a bit. We had lots of feedback, lots of input into how we could do the study, things to avoid, that sort of thing. We could not pin them down in a design that they thought would clearly lead to the effect. And indeed, we posed the following question: is there any set of pre-tests, manipulation checks, design features, and individual difference measures that we could include in our study that would convince you that a null result would be meaningful? And the answer to that question was no. Now, I strongly believe that there are many factors that can influence the results we obtain, but if we can never commit to the design before the results are known, then there's always a chance that confirmation bias will lead even the best intentioned researchers to conclude that there's support for their prediction when there really is not. Now, kind of get at this slide here. In terms of this question of what replicators, people who do direct replications at least, really want, we have been accused when we do these studies of the idea that we hate your ideas and that we're out to destroy social psychology when we do replication studies. This is not the case, I can assure you of this. The truth is that we believe that direct replication should be a basic component of scientific research. It doesn't have to be the only component. We absolutely believe, and I don't speak for all the people who do replication studies, I absolutely believe there should be a balance of direct and conceptual replication. However, I do think that direct replications help to address certain methodological practices that lead to problems for the entire field. I think that we may disagree about the potential for confirmation bias in the context of especially of small sample conceptual replication studies where there are flexibility in the types of analyses that people conduct. There is the potential for even well-intentioned researchers to be influenced by confirmation bias, to choose the analyses that support their prediction. Now, you may disagree that this is a problem for the field, but if all you do are the types of studies that leave this possibility open, then we can never know. So even if you believe that there is no reason to do direct replication because conceptual replications are a better way to do these sorts of things, at least take a skeptical attitude for a little while. Do some direct replications, challenge your view that if you had done that direct replication, you would have found the results, and try it and see what happens. We have tried to do this with people in the past. We'd say, okay, if it is the case, for instance, that you have expertise that we do not have, then we should be able to do an adversarial collaboration. You should get the effect, and I should not. The other side is often too busy to do those tests. Again, what is required is a skeptical attitude to this. So I guess when I perceive these types of reactions, I do get frustrated. I do sometimes get angry about this, not about the content of these findings. What frustrates me is the lack of skepticism by those who use the practices that are potentially problematic for the field. So in terms of why I think that this is important for the future of social and personality psychology, I think that people who do direct replications are often perceived as trying to look backward all the time, to destroy the field sometimes, to be these vigilantes that are out to get people. But we wouldn't care so much if we didn't think that there were real problems, that actually doing direct replications, a percentage of the time, that these wouldn't help address those. So I think that those who are doing direct replications, you can keep doing those. I think one of the things that has to happen is you have to be ready for some of the criticisms that you receive. So kind of do it in a dispassionate way. Do your study, put it out there. There's going to be some criticism. That's okay. You can deal with that. But for those people who don't believe in the value of direct replication, try it occasionally. See whether your belief that you certainly would have gotten that effect really works.